You know, really, it's old enough to be a game man by this point.
Here's 5 reasons.
Hi there, I'm retrogaming Puppet. This is 5 reasons, and yeah, we're right in the middle of the Game Boys of summer here on this channel, so not too hard to figure out what we're doing this time, huh? The Nintendo Game Boy was released in April of 1989 in Japan and the summer of 1989 in North America. Nintendo seems to cite July 31st as the actual date, but I've seen other sources claim various dates in August, and the way games were distributed in the US back then makes it very hard to pin down an actual specific day, so I'm sticking with summer. It hit Europe the following year, in the fall of 1990. The system was bundled with Tetris on its initial launch in North America, which was the perfect choice. While that game was popular in earlier releases, the Game Boy version helped propel it to crazy heights, and it did the same for the Game Boy. A true symbiotic relationship, ain't it? The system remained a popular and viable platform for a decade, which is honestly bonkers by any standard. The final black and white Game Boy release was Pokemon Yellow, which came out in the autumn of 1999 in Japan, Australia, and North America, and the summer of 2000 in Europe. When all was said and done, there were over 1,000 licensed titles available on the black and white Game Boy, with 600 more for the Game Boy Color, many of which were playable on the original configuration. But for this list, we're going 100% OG, black and white only. The system had a couple iterations, starting with the Play It Loud series, which was just new colors for the shell. But in 1996, it got a full redesign with the Game Boy Pocket, featuring a slimmer and smaller case while retaining the same screen size and managing to run on just 2 AAA batteries, as opposed to the original model's 4 AA's. The final redesign was the Japan-only Game Boy Light, released in 1998, which added a much-desired backlight to the system, and it kind of resembled the Indiglo watches at the time, if you remember those. And while that was the end of the classic Game Boy lineage, the games would continue to be playable on the Game Boy Color, and then the Game Boy Advance. Well, until the release of the Game Boy Micro, which only played GBA games, not any of the older ones. And of course, original Game Boy games are playable on the Super NES with the Super Game Boy and the Japan-only Super Game Boy 2, which added a link cable port and corrected a problem with the speed games ran at. While the Game Boy skipped the N64 generation when it came to playing on a TV for consumers, the GameCube's Game Boy Player brought it back. And when paired with homebrew software in the form of Extrem's Game Boy interface, it remains the optimal way to play Game Boy on a TV. But enough about the system. Let's get to the games. With such a huge library, I decided that for this episode, we're going with all good games. No, this is interesting, but not exactly fun stuff this time. So let's talk about 5 games that are still only available on the original Game Boy. Here's 5 reasons to own a Game Boy. Or one of the other numerous things that can play games for it. Solar Striker is unique in a couple of ways. First and foremost, it's a shoot-'em-up published by Nintendo. Kinda seems like after Radar Scope didn't perform as well as they might have liked, they shied away from shooters. The obvious exception is the Star Fox series, but even then, there's not a ton of those games. The second way it's unique is that it's never been republished by Nintendo. And this wasn't put together by some weird third party then published by Nintendo. This was an internal effort by Nintendo R&D 1, produced by Gunpei Yokoi, the same division of Nintendo responsible for stuff like Metroid and Kid Icarus. You'd think this would have been one of the first games on the 3DS Virtual Console, but no, it remains available only on a cartridge. The game itself is a fairly basic shoot-'em-up, even by the standards at the time, but it was clearly made to take into account the platform it was released for. There's never a ton of enemies on screen, and most everything moves relatively slowly, particularly compared to what was on home systems like the Genesis and TurboGrafx at the time. But it works. It's not too tough or too long, but for what it is, it's a good time, and an interesting look at one of the genres Nintendo has pursued least over the years. If you're interested in shoot-'em-ups or the early days of the Game Boy, then this one is a must. And it's cheap. Even complete copies go for less than $30 these days, so check it out. title would have you believe this is a port of the TurboGrafx mascot's second outing, but that just ain't so. While Bonk's core moves are the same, running, jumping, headbutting, the stage designs and power-ups are different. When Bonk eats meat in this game, he assumes one of 3 forms, including a vampire who can get health back by biting enemies instead of headbutting them, and perhaps most importantly for the gameplay, Jailbird Bonk here, who can pick locks to doors with special stuff inside. If you're a Bonk fan and you haven't checked this one out, you just gotta. Sadly, this one is more expensive for a bare cart than a complete copy of Solar Striker, so you might want to warm up that EverDrive. Another Nintendo-published effort, though it's pretty clear why this one hasn't seen a re-release. Coming out in the wake of GoldenEye, this game doesn't follow a particular Bond film's plot, and is more of a general pastiche of the Super Spy's adventures. It takes the form of the top-down action-adventure game, not entirely unlike Zelda, though this one is broken into stages. Bond travels the world looking to stop an international arms dealer from, doing what international arms dealers do. Featuring the full supporting cast, from Q to Moneypenny to M, this one is definitely on the better end of Bond's video game adventures. This one came out pretty late in the Game Boy's life cycle, so fans of the source material and the platform itself might have missed it. And if that's you, definitely check it out. And it shouldn't cost you any more than $10 for a bare cart. We'll wrap this episode up with a double shot of Konami goodness. First up, the second Gradius game released on the Game Boy. This one isn't a port of any earlier Gradius games, but like the Castlevania series on Game Boy, is its own thing. There's not really a ton to say here besides if you like Gradius, check it out. It's certainly not in the league of most of the mainline games, but for a portable shoot-'em-up you could definitely do a lot worse. This one came out as part of the Konami GB Collection series of carts, the Japanese Volume 3 and the European Volume 4. The former has Super Game Boy support with custom borders for each game in the collection, while the latter is compatible with the Game Boy Color. This one is on the expensive side too, I'm sad to say. Bare carts are in the $30 range, and the GB Collection carts are even more expensive if you can even find legitimate ones. So this is another reason to get an EverDrive. Much like Bond, it's clear why this one hasn't been reissued, and that's a shame. While there were 3 NES games, the Game Boy series had its own set of numbered sequels, just like Castlevania and Gradius. The first 2 are largely forgettable, but this one? If you ever wanted a Ninja Turtle Metroidvania, this is it. Raph, Don, and Leo are captured by Shredder, and it's up to Michelangelo to save them, and as he does, each turtle is added to the playable roster. They all have their own special abilities, allowing the player to explore more of the map as they become a foursome once again. And of course, given that it's Konami and a licensed game, this one is on the expensive side too, in the $30 to $50 range for a bare cartridge, but it really is a quality title that fans at a TMNT just gotta check out. And that does it for me. But hey, stick around because Joe will be coming back to round out the Game Boys this summer with another episode of Same Name, Different Game coming soon. Hey folks, this is Joe, and I want to thank you for watching Roger talk about 5 games that never left the Game Boy. If you dig the shows, please do all the stuff. Like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, all that jazz. If you really dig the shows, please consider throwing us a buck on Patreon. You'll get early access to new videos, an exclusive monthly stream, and your name here alongside all these lovely people. If you want more Game Boy, the playlist for the Game Boys of Summer is on the left, and if you want more Ninja Turtles, my look at TMNT Tournament Fighters is on the right.